Thank you, Lucy. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our session today, Metacognition for School Leaders. As Lucy said, please do post any questions that you have in the chat box, and we will try and get through those today. There may be opportunities for us to answer those questions as well in the panel workshop, which is happening at the end of the week, and Anna will also be joining us for that. So today's session, as I've said, is on metacognition for school leaders. And I'm joined today by Anna Smith, who is a Senior Education Manager here at Cambridge International. She's going to talk us through some excellent strategies for promoting metacognition, not just for learners, but for teachers and to try and create a whole school approach to metacognition. So I'm going to hand over to Anna.
Thanks, Jess. I'm on just start so you can see what I look like. I'm then going to turn it off because I think that will improve the speed of my internet. But it's lovely to see. Face to face or online. So I really look. My name's Anna Smith. I've lost sound apparently. I'm just going to talk to see. Right. Okay, I'm being told to keep going by my moderator colleagues. I'm sure they'll let me know if I cut out again. My name is Anna Smith, Cambridge International for nearly 6 years now. Before that, I was a teacher, mainly of A-levels, but also secondary students in general. And I was a school leader in a variety of schools, including international schools, focusing again on A-levels. I don't pretend to be an expert on metacognition. Today is to think about metacognition as a leader. What will that do to benefit our students, but also how will a metacognition approach benefit us as leaders, and how can we use that across our whole school? So I'm going to suggest some ideas. I'm going to try to leave a lot of time for questions, and I'll also try to give you the opportunity to contribute your ideas through the chat boxes and through some Mentimeters. If you have a mobile phone into another tab on your browser, then just have that with you, because shortly we're going to do our first little. And I'd like you to go to www.menti.com. That's 1076-2. When I switch to sharing my screen with the Menti, you can still see the code. It will just be across the top of the screen. So it will just take a short moment for the screen to come up with that Menti on. But as you start sharing your words or phrases, what 3 words or phrases sum up metacognition for you, we'll see that coming up on the screen as a word cloud. And by the way, I think this is a great little tool, Mentimeter, and I would really, really encourage its use in all sorts of settings. I think it's really good fun, and you can get a free account as well, which is nice. So I'm just going to share my screen there. And we're seeing a lot of ideas coming up there. Reflection, excellent. Thinking about thinking. Loving seeing self-confidence coming up there as well, and we'll talk a bit about that in just a moment. So we're seeing a lot, unsurprisingly, here around thinking, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. I like that someone's put sleeping on it as well. Moderators, my slides are not reloaded. Jess, are you able to load the slides up from the set that I sent you last night? That's version 3. Oh, lovely. The great thing about Mentimeter is they're going to keep coming up with your ideas. I will make sure that the final one is pasted onto the slides that we share so that you can all see what you've put there. I like the idea someone's put here improvement, beyond thinking, cognitive, deeper thinking, self-assessment, so many interesting words on there. I've put a slide here that just reminds us about the difference between different types of thinking. So we've got cognition and metacognition. So cognition really is the learning part of what we do. It's the thinking. When we're learning, it's how we understand things. It's how we process things. It's the actual task itself. Metacognition is taking that step backwards, reflecting on that learning, but also how that happens. For us in practice, for us and for our students, that's about how well did I do that? What could I do differently? What strategies can I use so that I can plan, I can monitor, I can evaluate how I'm learning, how I can do things differently? So I wanted to just start with thinking about how that approach can help our learners. And for this, I'm going to share one of my favorite definitions of metacognition. And this is from a writer called Perkins. It's quite old now. It was written in 1992, but I don't think it can be beaten for explaining the different approaches that learners have. And he talks about there being 4 levels of metacognitive learners. First of all, the tacit learner. Now, the tacit learner doesn't really do any metacognition at all. Now, they might be a really excellent learner. They might be great at cognition and thinking. They might be successful. But because they're not thinking about their strategies, I either know it or I don't, I'm good at it or I'm not. If they come up against a problem, they just assume they can't do it. They just assume, well, I thought I was quite good. I was quite good when I was aged 11, but now I'm a bit rubbish, aren't I? I've lost it. I don't understand things anymore. And they'll give up quite easily. So you might get a tacit learner who all the way through to A-level is doing brilliantly and then hits a problem at university. But often a tacit learner will hit problems earlier because learning is a challenge. And if they're thinking a little bit beyond what they can do easily, they're going to find that very difficult. Then the next stage is the aware learner. Now, they've got some ideas, they've got some things they can try. So maybe they might find some evidence for something, look something up, they know a good book they can use, they know a good writing frame they can use. But they're not thinking about that perhaps in a really, really strategic way. So they've got some tools they can use, but what we need to do is help them get to this next level of being a strategic learner. Now, a strategic learner has really thought about the strategies they need to help them learn something. So they'll know that they've got problem-solving approaches, they've got ways they can make decisions, they've got ways they can find evidence. And if they recognize the problem, they're really good at solving it. Now, I always think that this is like a student that is really, really excellent. And I had this myself when I was a school leader working with students doing A-levels. You'd have students that had been really good at maths when they were doing IGCSEs. And they could recognize a problem, they could use the strategies, they were really strong at it. But what they found difficult is if they saw something that was really unusual. So if, for example, they signed up for further maths, where the questions would be phrased in a different way and they'd have to think about things differently, then they found that hard because they didn't understand the new strategies. And this is where what we want, and this is Perkins. And this is the reflective learner. Now, the thing about the reflective learner, they know the strategies. They've got all those, but it's a bit more. If they hit a problem, they can think about things in a different way, and they're quite excited about solving that problem. They want to use what they know and the strategies they have used differently, or create new strategies, or work with people in different ways. Now, that reflective learner is probably the kind of learner that a lot of the universities that will be trying to see who those reflective learners are. They'll be asking them a really unusual question, the kind of thing the students haven't thought about before, and seeing how they cope. And what they want to see is not necessarily the students have the answer, but they want to see how they think. So really they're testing, if you like, the metacognition of the students. And I love Perkins 4 levels. I think it explains it really well. As I said, you sometimes get really successful learners, or really high scoring learners, I should say, at the bottom level there at tacit. But even though they might be scoring high marks, they don't have the ability to deal with problems. So one of the things we need to do with them, and it's the same with us, because you could say that will be the same for us as a leader, we might be excellent at it naturally, but if we hit a problem, how do we solve that problem? So it's getting everybody up that list and what we want. And I'm going to try something a little bit bold here, and I'm going to try writing on the slide. Oh, there we are. Right. We want to try to get everybody, including ourselves, up to that reflective level. And what I'd like to do here is get you thinking about something. And I want you to imagine there you are and you're doing a learning walk around the school. Now, if you haven't come across a learning walk, I know most of you absolutely will. Popping into the classrooms, seeing what's happening. When I did learning walks, I would normally say to teachers, today I'm looking for this. You don't all have to be doing it all the time, but I'm going to see how we do this in the school. So it's much more informal, but it's a good idea, I always think, in a learning walk to go around and look for something particular. So I'm thinking here, right, we're going to do a learning walk for metacognition today. What do you have a think about this? I'm going to post some ideas in a moment, and then I think we'll probably have time to get you to post your thoughts in the chat afterwards. But if you were doing a learning walk, what would you want to hear the learners saying? But also, what would you want to hear the teachers saying? So if you were doing a learning walk, what would you want to hear the learners saying? What would you want to hear the teachers saying? Think about that one. Oh, no, one of the things I love about Cambridge workshops is you're also quick off the marks. There's loads of great stuff in here in the chat already, so I'm going to leave there from, actually, I'm going to comment. What is it in your understanding of the subject that makes you think that? Why do you agree or disagree with me? And I love that. Thinking about it now, after that discussion, that actually makes sense. So the student's gone back to it and reflected. Why is that the only way? Can't this work? Yes, and going back to the maths example, I do remember some students saying, I've always been taught that way, I have to do it that way. Why can't I do it this way? Does that work a different way? So exactly that. Why would you say that? Open-ended questions. Do you all agree? Why not? And I think absolutely that open-ended questions, that's really, really important. And I'm seeing quite a lot here as well around it down a little bit. Can you explain how you did that? Really open-ended, not giving them the answers. What do you think about my idea? Asking each other interesting questions. You know, why have I done it that way as a teacher? Why do you think I did this? How are you planning to do it? Yeah, this is fantastic. I'm going to show you a few examples, but yours are so much better than mine. Keep these coming. Here are some that I thought of for some are quite high level, some are less high level, some perhaps are helping us think about just getting to that aware phase. So something like, we need to know which way round to go round the table. Let's talk about that. Let's plan it. It's quite basic, but it's helping them move up. That worked well because, or I'm not sure that's right, or oh, I like a challenge. And we do get, you know, that's wonderful when a student really wants that challenge. I think that's great. This student here, I think this student is doing something quite important. That didn't work, but that's okay. What do we try next? And I went to a school once to lead a workshop. By every single whiteboard in the school was a sign that said, mistakes are welcome here. And I thought that was brilliant because I really was encouraging the students to try things out and then learn. I took some photos of that. I tried to find it to put in this presentation. I'm sorry that I couldn't find them. I think they got lost in a phone upgrade at some point, but it just really will always stay with me. Mistakes are welcome because we learn from them. Going to just switch the teacher ones because I think those are quite interesting. And as you said, you and I, we're all thinking along really similar lines, open-ended questions. Did you mean this? Learnt. Now, I think 5W1H is probably a bit similar to 3 before me. It's not one I've come across. Lolita, if you were able to explain what you mean by 5W1H in the chat, that would be brilliant. Thank you. I've suggested 3 before me. This is something that a lot of you will do, or something similar, which is before you go to the teacher, try 3 other things. So 3 before me. So you might look it up in the internet. You might have another go to a friend. You might look at one of the books at the back of the classroom. You might look back in your notes. 3 things. Really good way of encouraging them to reflect on how they learn and try strategies. I think this one is also really important. And also this one. And they're the hardest for us as teachers and leaders. I find that difficult, or I made a mistake. I've learned from that. This is what I'll do differently. That's really hard, and you need a lot with your students. And as leaders, that's the same with our staff. to use that metacognitive approach as a leader with our staff and to say, I got that wrong and I'm going to learn from that. That's really, really hard, but it's really metacognitive. And if we do it as teachers and as leaders, it really helps set that tone that we are a metacognitive school. I like that, Renata. Yeah, I have my students discuss mistakes and keep track of those so we can make sure we're learning from them. I think, Cyprian, that's a really interesting one. Your approach is easier than mine. How did you get to that? And that's another nice way of showing that we don't think we're the experts. They're not trying to be us. Because let's face it, students will be a rubbish us. Our teachers be us. They've got to be a great them. And what we've got to encourage is their thinking and their approach. Yes, and encouraging, I think, encouraging those teachers to think beyond the classroom, I think that's so crucial. Because what we want here is a student who is such a good independent learner that they don't need us to kind of push them through it. They can think by themselves as well. And with that in mind, I'm just going to go on to the next slide because I want to just talk for our students, for our teachers, and for us as leaders, and that's motivation. Now, as we know, we've got intrinsic motivation, the motivation that comes from us and pushes us on. So ambition is a good bit of intrinsic motivation, and we know that a lot of our students who have got a very clear career goal, they're really working hard to do everything they can to fit that goal. And we'll see that I've put here this idea of delayed gratification. That's quite hard for students. But that's that thing where you're thinking, I need to get this task done, or I need to do this piece of homework, or I need to do this. But you know what? It's a beautiful day and I really want to get out for a walk. And balancing those two things. And of course, going for a walk is also really important for our well-being. But balancing those things sometimes can be hard for us. It can be hard for the students. And that ability to think, yeah, but I want to go to medical school, and spending my Saturday afternoons volunteering at the nursing home, that's really important. So even though it's hard work right now, that's going to help me. So I'm delaying the results, and that helps intrinsic motivation. But it isn't just that. Work really well to deadlines because they are extrinsic motivators. They are outside of ourselves. We've all been there. We've all done something the night before because we know it's due. And it's the same for students. And this is something that is pointed out a lot by Dylan William in his keynote that I remember sharing last year when he was talking about assessment for learning. Talked a lot about how we can't expect every student to be fully motivated all the time by intrinsic things. Even if they love learning, they're going to need to know, well, if I don't do that homework, there might be consequences for that. So it's a balance. But students also, back to that making mistakes, to deal with failure. The ability to go, I made a mistake and I'm learning from that. And if you're not familiar, I think many of us are, I know most of you in this room will be, but the work of Carol Dweck on growth mindset, it can get really simplified these days. People think it's just standing around in front of your students going, yes, we can do this, great. But it isn't. What it is, it's about praising the student's attitude, praising their process, really praising their metacognition. And the research that she's done suggests that when you say to somebody, I loved the way you worked through that, you had a great attitude, it that, and then more challenging. Whereas if what we say to the students is, wow, that was so good, you must be, the students get worried about failing and letting us down, and it actually doesn't even keep them in the same place. It sometimes pushes them backwards. So that motivation, helping students be motivated that mistakes are good, I can try things out, it's my attitude that matters, that's really important. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because that motivation, I would argue, is the third part of you mentioned in the chat earlier. We take our thinking, our cognition, we take our reflection and our cognition, our metacognition, take our motivation, we bring that together. The students become self-regulated learners, and they've got the strength to be able to go away and think through things themselves. Of course, they still need us as teachers, but if we think about preparing them for life, preparing them for jobs, for university, we're setting them off in the best way we possibly can. And again, and I keep coming back to that, that's the same for us, and it's the same for our teachers. And that's what I want to go on next. All the things that we talk about are also things that will help us just as much as they will help learners. Now, this is a useful little reminder. This reminds us that you could probably split metacognition into 3 phases: planning, monitoring, and evaluating. And it's all that part of that broader reflection. Helps us learn, it helps us regulate. But if we think around it in terms of planning, monitoring, and evaluating, then we might get some questions like this. Now, you can come up with much better ones. These are just some examples. But I use this grid because I've seen this used for teachers helping students. And of course, it's great. It works for students monitoring their learning. But it's also brilliant for us. Thinking about our personal leadership, it works so well, particularly if we're thinking about problem solving. What am I being asked to do? Now, which strategies have I used before to do that? Are there ones that I've used that might be useful? But actually, are there ones I haven't used I could try out? But then that constant, is the strategy I'm using working? Do I need to try something different here? How well did that go? What could I do differently? Now, I think we would all look at this sitting down in a presentation and go, well, yes, that's really clear. But I think the challenge for us as leaders is doing that because of the time constraints. So who are half listening to me, you're half listening, you're half doing your emails, and with the other half that doesn't exist of your brain because you're now at 1.5 brains, a student's just knocked at of being leaders. We're really busy. You come into work in the morning, you've got 200 emails to get through, you've got 3 people knocking at your door, you've got phone calls. And that means we get caught up very much in the quick response doing stuff all the time. And this metacognitive approach, coming back to this, and that's why I've kept this grid quite simple, is really helpful for us to pause, even just a few minutes a day. Is this strategy working? Do I need to try something differently next time? And I think we'd all say we need to make active time for that. But it's not wasted time. And that's probably a message for all of us as leaders. We don't waste our time when we do that. But a metacognitive approach helps us get out of that quick, do it all now, respond to everything. There's a English expression called fire. You know, all you're doing, you've seen a bit of fire, something's burst into flames in the corner, you put that out, you look somewhere else, there's more flames. It helps us step away from that and reflect. And of course, those approaches can also help us in our school. Now, I've done a bit of and then I'm going to hand this over to you. And they're not in any particular order as to how we can embed those approaches across our whole school. So first of all, I would suggest that we put metacognition at the centre. So we talk about it, we're vocal about it, particularly with staff. With students, you make your call whether they need to hear that word or you're just doing it, but in a different way. But doing something specific to staff and our students about that way of thinking. And it comes back to those questions will teachers ask to encourage that in the students? What structures will we have? And I think as leaders, we have a really important role to play here. So with staff, with our students, When we do our monitoring, it's not just going in and kind of, right, have you done this? What, I'm looking for this, I'm looking for this way of doing things, but these reflective questions. How might you come at this problem a different way? What might you do differently next time? What support might you need? Now, I think those are great questions if you've just done a lesson observation. And I think when I worked with very new leaders, one of the things they would sometimes do is they would jump in and they'd have watched a lesson and they want to tell the teacher what they think and they want to give them all the tips and advice straight away. But what they tend to do is they basically say, I want you to be a teacher like I am. So they're just giving them all this, be like me. Here's what I would do. Whereas how did it go? What do you think the strengths and weaknesses were? What would you do differently? How would you solve? I've almost never met a teacher that just sits there and stares at you and says, well, you tell me. They know and we can guide and support. And that approach I find is really helpful, and that's very metacognitive. So we've talked about looking for those approaches on our learning walks. We've talked a bit about actively celebrating mistakes, and I think that comes from the top. I think that comes from us as leaders, that we're prepared to grasp that, and that is so hard. And by the way, I'm not saying the time to do that necessarily is the point where you've got kind of the inspectors in and you want to tell them about all the things you don't do well. But I think they do want to see that you're being reflective. We struggle with these things, and this is what we're doing about it, and this is our aim. And I think that can be really powerful. But celebrating the opportunities, so if we do that, our teachers will do that. And it will also mean they don't try and hide things from us. Because if they're scared of how we react, they're not going to tell us that their class isn't achieving as well as they thought. They're going to try and hide it. They're going to try and pretend everything's fine. And then at some point, we're going to notice and it's going to be too late. So we really celebrate, okay, that's not going well. How can we do that? Well done for bringing that up. How can we solve it? There's clearly a really good overlap here with coaching and mentoring and the approaches we'd use there. And I would come back to this again myself, because this also works for a school, for a senior leadership team, it works for a department. And the same that's true in leadership is the same for a classroom teacher. You've got piles of marking. You've got parents' consultations tonight. You've got somebody on the phone. You've got preparation. And something like this, just taking that step back every so often, is really, really helpful, that reflective approach. I'm not here to do a sales pitch, but I would say the professional development qualifications, the PDQs, really do this well, because that's the basis of a PDQ and that reflection. And I know that teachers and leaders find that really, really helpful. Okay, we're going to try another Menti, and you are my experimental group now, because I've never tried this type of Mentimeter before, because I'm going to ask you to write short answers. So I want you to go to menti.com, different code this time. You may have to just hit the back button or refresh it, or close it and go back in. But enter the code 41539534. And this is about an idea sharing. So what I will want to do, hopefully, and I've said this confidently, I hope it will work, that we'll be able to share those answers with you after the workshop as well. I'm going to see if I can share my screen so that you can see your answers coming up. But this is the chance for you to share good practice with each other. If this doesn't work, we'll go back into the chat, but I'll try this. Yes, thank you. Brilliant idea. Peer observations. And the nice thing about a teacher observation when they're observing each other is you don't feel like you're being judged from above. And however lovely we think we are as leaders, they are going to be nervous about being watched. So that's really helpful. And you see, roll up. Allow time for deep thinking. Great advice for teachers there. Make it part of routines. Give examples. Yeah, no one is afraid to ask a question, any question, someone said there. I always say no question is too stupid. There is no such thing as a stupid question. My students used to try me out on it, and but I still believe there is no such thing as a stupid question. Yeah, assemblies, giving examples, exit cards, which presumably could be thinking about how you learnt today. Making sure no one's afraid to ask a question, yes. Yeah, appreciating other opinions, being open to differences, absolutely. So we really don't give the impression that there's just one way of doing it. Pairing up. And there's something about pairing up as well, that we either tend to put students together who have got maybe at similar achievement levels, or we're always thinking about it in terms of the student who's achieving more highly can help the student who's achieving less highly. One thing it's nice to encourage teachers to do is to, and I'm just gonna, I think I can just pause that scrolling for a minute. That should just stop that so I don't miss anything else. One of the things that I've completely lost my thread, you know, that's appalling. What was I saying? It'll come back to me. Jess, if you remember what I was saying, pop it in the chat for me. Before I pause the scrolling. Yeah, someone's quite rightly laughing there. Presenting, yep. I'm just going to hit enter and not try to do, and that should help us scroll through again. Having questions at the beginning of lessons, reviewing with yes, thank you, Jess. I was talking about Lucy. I was good students helping poorer students, about higher achievers helping lower achievers. And I'm going to say is that actually students have got a whole load of different strengths. So if you've got a class that supports each other, what I would often do is I would mix that up and say, well, you're really good at structuring essays. You're really good at the evidence in essays. I'm going to put you together so you can help each other. And sometimes the student that perhaps is a less high achiever has got that skill, say, in structuring an essay that's really good. But what they don't perhaps have is that skill in using evidence. So we're going to get them to help each other and helping them to appreciate that it's not just always high achieving students and everyone else, but they can help each other in different ways. I think really helps the metacognition for students. And I'm going to learn from that error not to be in the middle of something I'm saying while I'm pressing buttons, because it clearly puts you off. So that's my admitting a mistake and talking about learning from it. Teacher evaluation meetings. Mistake of the week in my classes. Teacher fail of the week. Yeah, this is what didn't work. It is, by the way, terrifying if you do that as a teacher. So we really need to ensure we've got a really strong climate of trust to do that. But it's really helpful. Promoting growth mindset. Absolutely. Induction program for new students. Yeah. Not assuming they come to that knowing it already. Yeah, and someone's mentioned active learning, and I quite agree. I think active learning approaches, that's very connected into this. And in fact, you could almost say metacognition is active learning version 2. This is taking active learning to the next level. This is great. I'm going to keep this running. I'm going to come back now to questions. I actually think if it's not off-putting to people, I might just keep that sharing while we start our questions. Actually, moderators, if you disagree, that back on the question slide. But I wonder if it's just quite helpful to have that running through. We've got 15 minutes left. I know from previous experience this will cut us off at exactly 10 o'clock, so we really just do have 15 minutes. But if you have any questions or anything you'd like to share, please do post them here. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We're distinguishing, Chris, between meta-learning and metacognition. Thinking meta-learning is learning about our learning and how do we improve that. I think that's a really good point there. And there are, you know, I think that could be quite a good distinction just to remind us that all of this is important. And I guess what I've done here is I've kind of bound all that together. But you're right, we could be distinguishing that. I love the fact that as I'm waiting for the questions to come in the chat, I can see a sharing good practice box here that says give wait time after asking questions. So I'm going to do that. Imrana, I think it's a good question here. What should a good pause time be for a student who is taking his or her time to think? I think so for me, I'd say that depends on what you're doing. If you're doing a teacher-led question and answer, I'd say I've heard people kind of say out 1 pink elephant, 2 pink elephant, 3 pink elephants, up to 5. For me, it's just about 2 seconds longer than you think is comfortable. So I will pause and I'll kind of give a gap. Just at that point when you think, no, really no one's going to answer this time. About 2 seconds after that, somebody always puts up a question. So I think it's just leaving it a little bit longer, maybe just count to 5 in your head. If what you're doing is a kind of longer class activity, you might actually be trying to build a bit more of that, and then it could be several minutes. It might be one time, might be much longer than that if you're doing a problem-solving activity. But do take the individual student into account, because some students can cope with a very long time thinking it through. Some students really need that structure. So for some students, you're going to have to say, right, try 3 before me. Have a go looking this up now, or have a go doing this, giving them a lot of support and structure. I can still remember being a trainee teacher, and I'm afraid I had a class that knew I was a trainee teacher and wasn't very well behaved. So I had to learn lots of techniques very quickly. But there was one student, he really struggled with his learning. And if he was stuck, he would immediately just shout really loudly, I can't do it, I can't do it. And he would carry on shouting. So for him, I wouldn't have left him that long. I would have had some structures in place, possibly had something for him already to help him think through. So what can be done when teachers and students have high workload and are burnt out? How can we still foster recognition? Ray, I think that's a really good point. As leaders, I think it's probably doing what we can to make the time for that and to make it clear we value the time for that. I think that means we also have to model it for ourselves. A huge mistake I made when I started as a leader was thinking that if I showed my staff how really hard I was working all the time, they'd really appreciate that. And that meant I'd be kind of sending emails late at night. and always never take a lunch break. And I thought they'd go, wow, she's working really hard for us. And actually it just scared them. Me an email at 10 o'clock at night, I've got to reply. So I was encouraging that without realizing it. So I would certainly be saying, can we make time for that? I think it's also a change in our mindset as a school. And I'm not saying this is easy. I'm really not. I don't think it's easy at all. You know what I'm going to do now? I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to put my camera on, I think, because I'd love. So if we just, Jess or Lucy, if you could stop sharing, if you could end the slide share, then I can see if I can get my camera on and I could actually talk to you. That might be quite nice. So yeah, I think students to understand and teachers to understand that time spent reflecting is time that actually helps us benefit of what we're doing. I think that can be really, really. But it's not easy. It really isn't, because everyone's really busy, but keep coming back to that. I came across a really lovely quotation a couple of months ago by a writer that says, self-care, looking after yourself, is a radical act. Actually, it's really important. It's really important we take that time to reflect. It will improve our leadership, it will improve our teaching. Let's have a look at more questions.
Anna, there's some really lovely points here about ways, strategies to kind of
so quite a few people talking about writing
in the lesson plans, and that I just thought those were really nice points.
Now, I think one of us is on a delay because I was saying exactly that at exactly that point. So I think I must have a 5-second delay on you there. But yeah, I think that's a really good point. And something else, if you have a scheme of work, putting some tips for metacognitive thinking in that scheme of work as well. So it's embedded in the scheme, and so you're thinking about, I don't know, the causes of the English Reformation, but at the same time you're thinking this could be a really good opportunity to get them to consider this. So I love that. Put it in the lesson plan, put it in the scheme of work. Jess, are there any other questions you've noticed that you think are really kind of powerful that I should be picking up on?
It was more of a point that someone said, when we do our PD sessions, we use metacognition with, it says them, but I assume staff, to motivate the staff to use it as well. And I think, obviously here we're talking about metacognition for school leaders. And as you rightly said in your presentation, this is about on a whole school level. So I think getting teachers to reflect on their reflection is incredibly powerful also. I wondered if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if I can get my file back up, having said let's not share, I'm just going to bring up that grid again, because I think that's fair. The reason I shared this grid, and the reason I shared it twice with just very, very slightly different words, it's arcs for learners. I think that works for us as leaders. It also works for individual teachers, and I think that works for departments. I think we could use it in all sorts of contexts there. And yeah, I think absolutely. And
I agree.
Taking that step back, it comes back to the question about timing. So somehow helping us all to appreciate that the time spent reflecting how we taught, but also how we learn, because we're all still learners, I think is going to be really powerful in improving teaching and learning.
I agree, and I think something that really stood out to me in this table was around is the strategy that I'm using working? And I think, you know, as teachers, you and I are both ex-teachers, but you can become quite fixed with a way that you maybe teach something, as you said, like the English Reformation, or, you know, whereas, and that might have worked for one class, but it might not work with every single class. So I think just that reflection is so important, isn't it? And we're really seeing some really reflective kind of comments in the questions.
And I've seen a question here I'd like to pick up on from
Mm.
Richard. Hi, Richard. Nice to see you again. And tips for motivating instruction staff to see the importance of metacognition, who use the answer, it's not needed, the results are good. Now, yeah, and I think the answer I'm going to give works for a whole load of other things too. It works for the parent in group work. Why are you sending them off to do some research? Why are you time doing X, Y, and Z? The answer is, first of all, that we might have highly successful, high achieving learners who, if they're not using metacognitive practices when they go on to the next stage, succeed as well, because it will be different and difficult. Now, for some learners, that won't be until university. For some learners, that will actually be a lot further down the school. Within the school, I always try to use the argument this will achieve even more highly. This might help them do even more. So we're always wanting to push our learners further to help them achieve their very best. And that's a conversation I've had over the years in a lot of different contexts. As I said, I remember some students turning up in my class and saying, why are we discussing this in a group? Why aren't you just telling us the answers? And I had to stop and explain. And that takes time. So I'd also say perseverance on it. And sometimes more theoretical things can help. So going back to those Perkins levels and talking that through, perhaps that might be a good way of doing it. But yes, it is hard if students are really achieving well. The other thing I'd say is help the teacher to go from where they are. As a lot of people said in the chat, there isn't one right way, implying, well, you're clearly doing it all wrong and we've got to do it all differently. What is going really, really well already, don't change that, add. So how can a metacognitive approach add value to what the teacher is already doing and is clearly doing well? And that's really crucial. I come back again to those new leaders sometimes I've worked with, and they come in and they're so keen to help everyone. They want every single teacher in the school to teach the way they do. And that's not what we're doing as leaders. The way that's best for them. So I think making sure that we build on the clear successes of those teachers and what they're doing well, and just helping them to think, well, how can I add something, rather than going in and saying, well, that doesn't work, you've got to do this differently. I think that's really important. I think we've probably got the time possibly for one more short question, if there's anything in there. I like somebody's talked as well about the idea of using the lesson plans to think about, well, we're going to start with some kind of provocation that really gets them thinking at the beginning, that we're thinking about using those assessment for learning techniques like hinge point, and then we've got some reflection at the end. I always used to try, if I could, to think of a question that got them thinking when they went out into the corridor. And yeah, Ray, I think fostering culture that it's okay to make mistakes, and it's so hard, and I'd say it's flipping it to say we, as hard as we possibly can, to be as good as we possibly can be, but the only way we're going to do that is if we're prepared to make mistakes. And I'm going to give you an example that I wrote in a blog a couple of years ago, and that's, I'm really bad at sport. I was awful at it. So I used to get, I'm not very sporty, but I've got into it a bit as I've got older. And one summer I thought, I'm going to learn to sail a boat. So I went on a course. And the first 2 days I was terrible. I was awful. I just couldn't get it right. And the teacher said to me, the trouble with you, you are so scared of making mistakes that you're focusing on that and you're not learning anything. You're never going to improve unless you just have a go, and you'll probably get it. You might even fall in, and that's okay because the water's not very deep and you've got a life jacket on. You'll be all right. And I just loved the way that teacher had really got to the heart. In academic study, I'll make mistakes all the time. I don't care. I'm confident. But in sport, where I'm not confident, I was terrified of looking stupid and making a mistake, and I had to learn. And I think for us, if we can really change that to say we will need to make mistakes to improve, I think that would be useful. Now, I can see that we have short end time and are going to be disconnected in approximately 5 minutes. So I'm going to hand back to Lucy and Jess to close things off. I've loved talking to you, and I'm going to really enjoy looking at all your advice and tips later, and hopefully we'll find a way of getting that shared with you as well.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you to everybody for taking part today. Some excellent questions and points there. I think, as Anna said, one of the amazing things about these presentations is how much we learn from you as well. So thank you so much for your questions and for your comments. As Anna said, this presentation, and Lucy said, these presentations will all become available after the conference. We will be sending those out, and they'll be available for you to watch. And we will be able to share the Menti and the Padlets with you as well. So thank you very, very much for taking part in this session. And yeah, thank you, Lucy, for all your help.